My name is Indy Nidell, and welcome to the Great War. We left off last time with the Austro-Hungarian Empire declaring war on the Kingdom of Serbia, and I'm going to begin today with a couple of telegrams. Now, in Russia, there were very real fears that Austria's plans might extend to more than just Serbian occupation or Serbian punishment. Russia thought that Serbia might actually lose her independence. You see, Austria had mobilized 3/4 of her army, which was way more than enough to deal with Serbia. So on July 29th, as Austria began bombarding Belgrade, Russia partially mobilized her army just in case. The Tsar, though, did not want a war with Germany, who had pledged to support Austria-Hungary. So he telegraphed his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, quote, "To try to avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far." End quote. He signed it, Nicky. At the same time, the Kaiser was telegraphing back, quote, "I am exerting the utmost influence to induce the Austrians to deal straightly, to arrive at a satisfactory understanding with you." End quote. This was signed, Willie. However, that same day, the German fleet began to mobilize, and in response, the British fleet was sent to its war stations in the North Sea in case of a possible attack. Now, at that point, the allied pair of France and Russia were putting pressure on Britain to declare that in case of a German attack on Russia's ally France, Britain would join the war. But Britain, especially the Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey, wouldn't commit. Okay, important stuff now. Germany told Britain in a secret message that if Britain remained neutral, Germany would take no territory from France except her colonies. This provoked the opposite effect, though, showing Grey once and for all that Germany was committed to going to war against Russia. Now, in Russia on the 29th, there was no declaration of war, but a draft of nearly 6 million men began, and the army was already moving towards the Austrian border. And it was at 5 p.m. on July 30th that the Russian general mobilization began. See, the Tsar finally signed this order because of partial German mobilization and his worries about being unready on the Polish front. It all actually got a little confusing here. Okay, German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg telegraphed Vienna not to mobilize against Russia, but the same day, German Chief of Staff Moltke telegraphed his opposite Austrian number Conrad, mobilize at once. So, who was really in charge? And then, Germany sent Russia an ultimatum to stop all war measures of any kind against Austria and Germany within 24 hours. This was rejected. Now you could see that this was becoming a real mess, but at the end of July, all of the various armies were pressuring their political leaders because many of the leaders were against the war, but the armies were afraid of being unready, and they all wanted to move as quickly as possible. On July 29th, a German ultimatum to Belgium was prepared. What? Belgium? What, little neutral Belgium? Why Belgium, you ask? Here's why. See, if Germany was going to war with Russia, she could not help but be worried about France invading her from behind because, again, France and Russia were committed allies. So here was the idea, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Schlieffen Plan. Alfred von Schlieffen had been the German Army Chief of Staff from 1891 to 1905, and here was his big idea in case of a war with both Russia and France. France would have to be knocked out of the war immediately so all of the troops could focus on the more daunting task of attacking Russia, okay? So Germany would make a swift attack through Holland and Belgium, completely bypassing the heavily defended Franco-German border and sweeping down into Paris from the north. Moltke streamlined the plan a bit by skipping Holland, but the idea was to take Paris within 6 weeks and thus avoid a two-front war. Now we'll go into that in more depth later. But Belgium was neutral, and Britain had a treaty with her. And on July 31st, Britain asked France and Germany if they would respect Belgian neutrality. France said yes, but Germany did not respond. So Britain eventually sent an ultimatum of her own. If Belgium were attacked, Britain would go to war. In all of these countries, people were enlisting like crazy, and nationalistic fever was going off the rails. In France, for example, Jean Jaurès, leader of the Socialist Party, who was appealing to all the European working classes to stop the war, was assassinated on the 31st. Ironically, this actually caused more shock around Europe than Franz Ferdinand's assassination did. But it showed that in France there was a great deal of enthusiasm for the war. See, many people wanted revenge for the loss against Prussia over 40 years earlier. Back to Russia and Germany. Now, the day after Russia mobilized, Germany also mobilized. Now, this was presented in the Reichstag as purely defensive, okay? We have to mobilize to defend ourselves because they did it first. And this was pretty much the only way the German military high command could convince the Social Democrats to agree with the mobilization. And on the evening of August 1st, the German ambassador gave Russia the German declaration of war, which resulted from Russia rejecting the German ultimatum to stand down. Actually, as it turned out, the German ambassador actually gave the Russians two versions of the declaration of war. One that claimed Russia refused to respond to Germany, and one that said the Russian response was unacceptable. Yep, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid in a diplomatic service. The Kaiser at first ordered an attack on only Russia, but Moltke convinced him this wasn't really possible since most of the army was already committed in the West, and that evening, German troops entered Luxembourg to secure the telegraph and the railways. Here we go. On August 2nd, German troops crossed into France for the first time in over 40 years, and there were several small border skirmishes. At 7 that evening, Germany gave Belgium an ultimatum. Give German troops free passage through Belgium. Belgium refused. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France, and that same day occupied 3 towns in Russian Poland. On August 4th, German troops entered Belgium, and Britain declared war on Germany. Now, many of those in England who had been anti-war before were suddenly very much for the war. Grey, the Foreign Secretary, for example, now believed that if Germany wasn't stopped, then all European national independence was just a fiction. In the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire began mining the Dardanelles on August the 3rd. Now, the Turks were not yet going to war, and we'll see more of them in a few weeks. But what of Serbia? I mean, this whole thing snowballed because of issues between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, right? Well, we're going to get into that in much more depth next week, I promise. Now, in much of Europe, there was huge optimism about the war. I mean, everybody really thought that they were going to win. Even though by this time there were several million soldiers marching around Europe, this was still the war that would be over by Christmas. The Russian High Command, for example, asked for new typewriters, but were told that the war would not be long enough to justify the expense. And because of all this, everyone's military plans called for huge immediate attacks, since there seemed to be no point saving resources for later when you could just win right now. But here's the thing. The wars people looked back on were short wars like the Franco-Prussian War, but they really should have looked at the American Civil War to get an idea of how long and how bloody modern warfare was going to be. All right. On August 5th, the German Empire reached her first serious military obstacle, Liege. Now, that day, the Germans failed to take any of the 12 forts of the city. Ludendorff managed to enter Liege on the 7th, but taking the forts was necessary for the German advance. Germany brought in her big guns, and this was accomplished in only a few days. But this is really important. You see, France and Belgium had strategically placed fortresses all over them. They were very expensive and heavily defended. But one of the first things the war showed was the technological advance in artillery. Heavy howitzers could bombard fortresses from 10 miles away without real fear of retaliation. And the fortresses were just sitting ducks. So all of the fortresses attacked in 1914 fell real quickly, and all that money and all that effort to build them up was for nothing. So, to bring us up to date, on August the 6th, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Russia, and Serbia declared war on Germany. If you want to know what happened in the last episode, click right here, and let me know how you liked it. And if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, put them in the comments below. Now, if you follow us on the other social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, you can learn more about the Great War. We have behind-the-scenes footage and all kinds of other background information for you.